first radio licence was issued to Jack Ryan of the A.J. Ryan Radio, Electrical and Music Store in Kingston.
Our first radio was a Philips 4-valve with an Amplion cone speaker which hung separate on the wall. The set itself had 4 knobs on it, and it took you 10 minutes to tune the damn thing in.
Jack Ryan sold, installed and repaired the new radio sets. Before long, he needed an assistant to run his backroom radio station, 2CA. George Barlin drove into Canberra with Jack Ryan in 1933.
Well, when we drove in, I thought, what a bloody awful place. And it was the middle of summer. There were rabbits everywhere. It was hot and dusty. And then in the distance, I saw Parliament House. It was in the middle of a paddock. There were sheep around it and rabbits. There was dust and heat and flies, and that was Canberra.
When the new medium came to Canberra, it was welcomed here in a way, I think, more than in the cities, which tended to take those things for granted. It was a voice in the silence at night. It helped with the Canberra Times, which after all was not being published every day, to give us a sense of community, to tell us what was going on.
The Monday to Friday small twin-engine passenger service between Sydney and Melbourne often had to find Canberra in difficult weather to refuel and without the aid of radar.
Well, we knew that if we could see the top of Mount Ainslie, there was 1,000 feet between the base of the cloud or the fog and the ground. And we'd tell the pilot this. He would attempt to fly over the top of the station. Sometimes he'd make it, sometimes he wouldn't. And when we couldn't hear him, the chances are, in 99 cases out of 100, that Mrs. Brown or Mrs. Jones from Nicholago or Hall would ring in and say, he's over my house now, and we'd tell him and where he was, and he would change direction, fly over the station, and when he was directly overhead, we'd tell him. He'd fly down south and come in up the valley and eventually come through the fog and land. And never once did we look like having an accident. My only regret was that I was not in on 2CA at the beginning. Jack Ryan started it, and I came in as the boy around the place about 15 months later. But even in those days, we were thinking and talking about television. And I decided then that as Jack Ryan had brought radio to Canberra, when it came, I'd bring television to Canberra. And of course, there it is.
Channel 7 began transmission from their studios on top of Black Mountain on the 2nd of June 1962, bringing television to Canberra. It opened to one of the smallest audiences in the history of television. Capital 7 was one of the first stations to use videotape, outside broadcast vans and adopt data processing in Australia. It was also the first station in Australia built solely for colour. And for 25 years, it has remained independent of major networks and interests.